Reddit is suing Anthropic for scraping its platform data illegally, it claims. Obviously unsubstantiated until we see how it plays out. Even after telling the company to stop. So they asked it to stop. They're still doing it. So, what happens when platforms and AI labs start treating training data like oil in a global power struggle? That's where we're at. So, what happened? Reddit has filed a federal lawsuit against Anthropic, accusing the Claude AI maker of unauthorized scraping of its platform content. Anthropic had sort of blocked such access, it had said. But according to the complaint, even after that, the Anthropic bots made over 100,000 server requests. Reddit attempted to cut it off. They offered to sell a commercial license. Anthropic said no deal. They trained Claude on the data anyway, and now its models are benefiting from, content that Reddit users created with no attribution and no payment. So the filing really points out that Claude continues to reference subreddit discussions, often pulling from sort of niche communities, reinforcing Reddit's claim that its data is valuable when used at scale. Because if it wasn't valuable, why would they be scraping it and using it? And it also notes that Reddit had successfully negotiated licensing deals with both OpenAI and Google, which is interesting because Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, actually owns like 9% of Reddit or something like that.
Yeah.
So even though he's like a significant owner, he still did a deal, and Anthropic says no deal. So I think this is just like, we got to figure out how to stop this turf war here.
Well, it's such a fascinating question. I mean, Reddit is one of the last real bastions of large user-generated content that someone's validated, right? So you see a lot of Google searches now going to Reddit, or historically have been going to Reddit, and this, they're worried about traffic with AI. But this question of, if I don't replicate the content of yours, like the same question we have with the New York Times. If I read the New York Times, the way any writer reads other great writers and then uses that to train themselves on how to write better, but you don't replace the thing that they were writing, is that copyright infringement or not? And it's clear that in the case of a human, it's not, right? Like, I'm allowed to read the New York Times and then write, like, those are things I can do. I'm allowed to read Reddit and then write my own user posts or whatever. And, but obviously I can't copy the words from any of these and put them on there. That's copyright violation. And so this real question of what training data is and isn't allowed to be used is a really tough one. And I think it's hard because there's economic implications for the businesses whose data is being used to train. But the reality is that this data is all available for free on the internet. And there are definitely companies outside of the US or EU jurisdictions that are going to train on this data. And so, that you've also got to balance the kind of national security or competitiveness angle of, if we cut off this hugely valuable source of training data for AI, Chinese companies are not going to do that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for us? It's a tough balance to make, but it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, it is so confusing because normally when you have a hard question, you look at the precedent of what already exists. And to your point, the content's already free. Every time a person goes and reads something on there and then uses it to inform their own writing or post or whatever, they just trained on the data too, right? It's just like Anthropic can do it at a much larger scale. And so, what is the answer to that is entirely unclear. I remember chatting with somebody recently who said, I struggle when people act like using ChatGPT is somehow cheating or this type of thing, because in any other context, if I'm going to try to say something smart or put something smart out, my first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the library and I'm going to read and learn about what is the current thinking on this thing to date. And I can just do it faster when I use these things, right? And so, like, how is doing it faster cheating? Like, I still would have done that. It just would have taken me a lot longer time. And anyway, so these questions, I feel like we need some policy help figuring out how to answer them, because I think it's right now, like, nobody's winning in the sort of ongoing war between, Google and these people and Claude and these people, and, everybody's just embroiled in lawsuits.
Yeah, and clarity, it's so hard to build anything if you don't know what I think most of these companies can follow the rules of the road if they know the rules of the road. But first, you got to specify the rules of the road and what they are. And we're in a little bit of lack of clarity as far as those go in terms of training versus, I mean, it's a really interesting delineation on what you train on versus the kind of output. And are you responsible for output that may violate? But then again, Reddit's a great example where there's value in those posts. How do I fix this thing? And you're not going to write the same words. It's going to sound different, but you got the knowledge out of that post. And is that destroying value for Reddit or not? They're tough questions, but I do think ultimately you're right. These tools make life easier for users. They make information access faster. The cheating point is so interesting because I hear this in my kids' school. There's this question, what's like, well, I mean, they could have gone to Google or looked up information, but also just remember that when we're thinking about tests in school, I think we're so behind the time. Like, in what work scenario, when anybody has graduated college, are they told, please give this presentation, but don't look at any of the information that's available. Don't use the tool. Like, not, and you don't have open, like, none of this would be a realistic version of what they're going to be asked to do in the real world. And it kind of feels like we're still testing the wrong skills versus saying, hey, this is what is available as the greatest set of tools to use to accomplish a task like giving a presentation or writing a report. How can you write the best possible report using these tools or give the best possible presentation, which is what the real world looks like?
Yeah, I'm also like, I'm very curious at what they actually got from or trained the Reddit content on, because I can imagine that a big part of the value of content like that is getting like localized how people speak and how they generate words and that type of stuff, as opposed to like their actual content. I mean, maybe this is the source of AI hallucinations, is that it's being trained on Reddit data. Maybe we've just cracked the code, but like I can imagine that they're not looking for like highly factual content from the Reddit training, but they're more looking for that nuanced, how do I customize the experience type of thing.
You raise your point. It'll be really interesting to see if they can. The models inherently will take both from any kind of data. They don't separate. I'm learning language versus I'm learning information. But a lot of the work Anthropic is doing to look behind the curtains of their, the kind of what different elements of the neural networks that underlie these LLMs actually represent concepts that you can find in there. And I wonder if they'll be able to take a step even farther back to go, what training data contributed to different elements, knowledge-based elements versus kind of more language-based elements, and actually be able to start to understand what kind of value is being driven by different kinds of data. So that will be fascinating. I think we could use a lot of regulatory clarity. It's clear that a couple of the big guys are just going to keep training on whatever they get their hands on. They don't really ever tell you exactly. I mean, they're a little cagey about what exactly is in the training data sets because they don't want to invite these lawsuits. But it's easy to look at one side, hey, you're stealing from Anthropic, or the other, the tool is better and we're not replicating your data, and to lose sight that there's like really a tough balance of competing interests that we need: value for users, value for the generators of the content that's being used for training, and the competitive angle of what happens if we choose to go down a certain path that limits our technology compared to, global powers that don't take that same path. And where does that ultimately leave us in a better place 5, 10 years down the road? It's a tough set of things to weigh. I'm not so optimistic that our federal government is great at weighing such complicated, nuanced decisions these days, but I think that's what we got to hope for because we definitely need some clarity.
Well, try to be optimistic. We need something. So hopefully someday, even if not tomorrow.